listeners, welcome to episode 40. Unbelievably, with all the arguing and all the shit music we listen to, we've made it to 40 episodes, which is obviously hugely impressive, and we are all very proud.
We're proud of ourselves, yeah.
Very proud of ourselves, and we know you're proud of us too.
Doubtful.
So we decided to do a special episode to mark this momentous occasion where we're going to look back at Picky Bastards so far and pick some of the best albums that we all decided, us and the editors of the website decided what the best albums of Picky Bastards history was. So we're going to talk about them. But first of all, I just want to ask Matt and Nick how they are feeling about turning 40 today.
Oh, I stood up and I groaned.
Yeah.
Stood up and you groaned.
Distant memory for me. I don't know what you're talking about. I remember those days only vaguely.
When do you turn 50?
Fuck off. That is a harsh question. That is a really harsh question.
Okay, we'll move on. So, the 12 albums that we chose between us and the three... Is that right? 3 other editors? 4 other editors? 3 other
Three
editors.
other editors.
3 other editors.
God, his memory's gone now as well.
Wow.
So the albums are Kano's Hoodies All Summer, Brutalism by Idols, I still don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but Jamie by Brittany Howard, Mount Eerie's Now Only, self-titled Kiasmos album, Care For Me by Saba, Capacity by Big Thief, Don't Let the Kids Win by Jacklin, Grey Area by Little Simz, Sharon Van Etten's Remind Me Tomorrow, Noname's Room 25, and The Iceberg by Oddisee. So those are the 12 albums we'll be discussing today. We've got 4 quick sort of round-robin questions to start us off, and then we'll go through. And by the end of this episode, we will have named the best album we all discovered on the Picky Bastards podcast.
As long as Frank can do the maths.
I can do the maths. We've been doing the maths for ages. Yeah, it's good this time because you can't do me over because I'm the only one who knows the other voters, so you can't ruin my
if we trust you
at the end.
If we trust you.
I can't show you up for poor maths, you mean?
Yeah. Well, anyway, let's move on. So, the first of our 4 round-robin questions is quite simply, what is the best album you've personally discovered on the podcast? And I'm going to go to Matt first. He will have 90 seconds to answer that question, starting now.
Yeah. So actually...
wasted 10 seconds of it straight away.
I wasn't here for, obviously, the first 8 episodes, so I tried to frame my questions within the time period I was on the podcast. Even though I was listening, I was obviously thinking more analytically the rest of the time. And so I am going for this for Little Simz and Grey Area. And the reason is, I do think everything is in the shadow of Little Simz. There are...
Fuck off.
Only a couple of albums that we've actually covered since then that I've listened to more. It is one of my stalwarts that I just turn to and I regularly listen to pretty much any time, any day. It's a wonderful album. It's dynamic. It's rich. It's jam-packed, full of fun and just good beats. There isn't a single track that really lets it down. It's wonderfully British without feeling it still feels unique. It's not super grimy. It's not super UK hip hop style. It's got its own thing going on, but it does sound very British throughout. And I think, especially with albums, we often talk about drop-off at the end of an album, but...
I'm sorry, you're not allowed to say whatever you were going to say.
Yeah, that's fine.
90 seconds up.
That's the worst ringer we've had, I think, on this.
Yeah, I know. I spent some time before trying to find the worst one I could. I think I was annoying Kirsten because I was just sat on the sofa playing different alarms for about 45 minutes. But I like the one I ended with.
What album is that?
Yeah, well, it does sound like some of the stuff we listen to for the podcast.
Yeah, it does,
yeah.
Okay, same question to Nick. What is the best album you've discovered on the Picky Bastards podcast? Go.
Okay, so I'm going to go with Saba on this one. And I will say that it was a very, very close run thing, and I agonised about it for a long time. I think ultimately, though, the Saba stayed with me more than anything else on the whole podcast in terms of, except for the Why I Love stuff, because it's so emotionally affecting all the way through, and it's so, I felt like I've made such a personal connection to Saba's thoughts, processes, and I think, as an example, in Prom King, which is the best track on it, I think it would be easy to say, the part at the end of the song where he commits to get in his car with his friends and drive around anywhere to find his, I think we will discover, dead friend who's been killed, without anywhere to go, is probably the most heartbreaking moment of any song in this entire playlist. And I'm even allowing for Mount Eerie in that, which we'll come back to later, I'm sure. It's just a painfully sad, moving, and human set of stories throughout the album, which I absolutely love and has stuck with me throughout. So, I think I've got to give it to Saba.
Well, that was a surprise one for me. You had about 4 seconds left as well, so well done.
Perfect.
Okay, cool. Are you ready to sign me, Matt?
Oh, so ready.
Yeah, so same question.
Same question to yourself. 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so I think I was pretty set on Big Thief's capacity as my answer to this when we started this playlist. But in the month we spent listening to the list, I was surprised to see another album rise above any of the 3 that I picked. In the end, I think that it's Kano's Hoodies All Summer that's the best album I've discovered on the podcast. As much as I loved it when we listened to it on last year's Mercury Prize episode, I didn't even consider picking it for this playlist, but I'm really glad that Tom did, because listening to it alongside this really strong list of albums, I've realised that it's even better than I gave it credit for. I think it's probably the closest thing you get to a perfect album on this list. I think it's musically diverse, it's genre bending, it's fronted by an artist who's just ridiculously skillful, his flow's ridiculous, his lyrics are powerful as hell, he's very politically astute at every single turn on this album. And I just think it has more to say than almost any other album on this list. And even though it clearly has a message and clearly has a point to make, it does it without hammering you in the head, and it's also really fun. I don't think there's a bad song on offer. I think it's kind of really interesting collage album while also being stupidly cohesive. And last time we talked about it, I picked out Got My Brandy, Got My Beats as an obvious highlight. I would say it's still probably my favourite, but I think there's just too many good songs to pick. So, yeah, even on this very strong list, this was the album that I kept going back to this month, and it's taken my top spot in the end. Definitely. Okay.
Surprise.
So we went very hip-hop, didn't we, for that question?
Yeah, very
surprising
choice there for you. No folk for Fran, I can't believe it.
No folk for Fran.
Well, I don't always... I listen to as much hip-hop as I do folk.
You're lying.
So that's a silly comment. But right, so any of those 3 albums, I suppose, none of us picked the same one, so what did we start with? We start with Little Simz. Shall we have a quick chat about Little Simz?
Yeah.
I can talk about it. There isn't a lot else to say about Grey Area, is there, on this podcast, really? We've talked about it a lot. I think we featured it twice already because we had the first episode when we had it on, and then we also had it on a Mercury Prize episode. It is a superb album. I think Little Simz is one of the most exciting artists on the planet today. I think she's going to keep getting better and better, and I think her next album's going to probably better Grey Area. And this one blew our minds straight away. I think it's a rare album that almost all of us agree on, including all the editors. I think songs like Selfish, Wounds and Flowers are some of the best hip-hop of the last decade. But yeah, there's not loads more to say in terms of positives. But I will say that this didn't finish as highly on my list as I expected it to. After listening to all these albums, it kind of slid down below a few. And I think that's because I think as a complete album, I do think it has a couple more dips than some of the albums.
Really?
It's up against. Yeah, but this is I'm talking about. I had to get to the real small details on some of these albums because there's so many albums I love on this.
Never
list.
heard Matt sound so close to angry.
I can't see a single dip.
My dips, and I know at least one of them you're not going to agree with me on, but the dips for me is I don't really like the song Venom.
Oh, what? That's the best song on the album.
I don't like the song Venom. I think the flow is very good on that song. It's not that I dislike it, but I don't really like the beat. I think it's a bit of a dip in the album. And also, I think the song Therapy, I really don't actually like the song Therapy at all. I actually find it quite problematic. I find some of the messaging on that song quite problematic. But these are just very small complaints about what is an outstanding album. It's just that these are the things that allowed other albums to sneak above it, because I think some of the albums that did get above it for me are pretty close to perfect, whereas this isn't quite. But having said that, she's probably the artist on this list that I'm most excited about following for the rest of her career. It's just that for this album didn't quite match some of the other albums on this list for me.
Yeah, that's actually something I worry about. Is she going to be able to keep up with this album because it is so good?
I think she'll better it.
You think you're for once you're being very optimistic.
I think she'll better it. I mean, I think Drop 6, the EP that came after it, was just absolutely outstanding. And I just think she's in a groove. And I think that, like, if you look at the career so far, it's got incrementally better each time. And I just think it will continue to get better.
Fingers crossed.
Do you think Drop 6 is better than this then?
Well, it's hard to say. I think it's consistently good, and I think there are a couple of drops on this album. I think Grey Area is an album, and I'm always going to prefer an album to an EP.
Album, yeah, so
it's a more complete piece of work. But I think that what she did on Drop 6 in terms of just sitting in lockdown, sitting in her own space, and putting those songs together, and I just think a couple of them are just mind-blowingly good. I love it.
So I'll jump in on Little Simz as well. Yeah, this was the one, as I just said when I was talking about the Saba, that was so close to being my favourite one, my top of the list. It was the other front runner. I really agonised about it. I think it's the heaviest, in some ways it's the heaviest and the most furious album we've done in this podcast, and that's including any metal or death metal or any of that stuff we've done. This is the most intense, in-your-face album we've done, and I absolutely love that. I think it's essentially flawless, with a particular high point of Venom. And it was a very close run thing for the top spot. But I think, as I said in the description of Saba, that the Saba just was more affecting personally. I just found it more moving, and that's why it stuck with me for a little bit harder than the Simz. I came back to Saba more often than the Simz. But what a fantastic album, and I'll be following everything she does.
I mean, that feels like a good way to go to the Saba. Matt, do you want to talk about the Saba at this point, or?
Sure. Yeah. Well, for Saba, I feel like the odd one out since we did the podcast because I liked it, but I know you guys and the editors love it, and I just really haven't connected with it in that way. I think I can see all the parts. I can see his storytelling. I can see the musicality, which I like. He is just such a fantastic storyteller. But something about the tone of it all, it never moved from, this was interesting for us to listen to an album that I want to put on. I know. I haven't put my finger on why, to be honest. I think it's, if I'm going to guess, it's a little bit barer. I often lean towards more joyful, happier music or more aggressive music, and it isn't those.
You used some word in reference to Little Simz that was like poppy or something, or jolly or something. I was like, that's an odd term to use. I wish I can remember the exact word you used now, but Saba is not that. And, when you were referring to Little Simz, you were saying it was, I don't know if you said jolly or...
I've never heard either of you say jolly. But,
jolly is definitely in my vernacular, but I definitely didn't say that about Little Simz.
Okay, well, there was some word that seemed to me to strike a very pop sort of tone, which I was surprised about.
Yeah.
But Saba is definitely not that. I can see what you're saying.
Yeah, it is more direct and it does incorporate more pop elements in Little Simz, for sure.
That's true.
All right, well, so for me, Saba, I think when we covered it, I was a really big fan. It did fall off my radar quite a lot, really. I think that was, at least in part, because of how disappointing his live show was when we went to see
him. The gig was a joke. It was a nightmare.
Oh, God, it was one. I mean, and I've seen him do a Tiny Desk concert in which he was incredible, but that was terrible. And I think that scarred me a little bit. So... But it was great to revisit this album. I think I've heard it a few times since then, but this was the first time I've really spent a lot of time with it, and it is very strong, and the praise I had for it back then still stands. I love that it's a whole story. I think the journey from sort of busy sirens at the start to Prom King is really well put together. Prom King is one of the best and most interesting songs we've covered on the podcast, I would say. Life's another great song, very powerful in a lyrical sense. But I do think that on such a good playlist, this did get pushed quite far down into the bottom half of me. I think up against some of the other albums we're covering today, its inconsistencies are quite stark. I think it has some of the highest highs, but I think some songs don't really do a lot for me at all and just kind of slide by a little bit. So I think it's a very good album, but I don't think it's a classic in the same way that several of these are. I think there's several albums that I would actually call classics on this list, and this isn't one of them. I'm kind of fascinated, Nick, actually, that this became your number one. You didn't pick it. I think it was Sam that picked this,
That's
wasn't
right.
it? And,
Yeah.
I remember when I picked this, because I picked this for the episode that we featured it on first time, and I remember listening to it and kind of thinking, this is really good. Nick's gonna hate it, because I felt there was a bit of a trap element to it.
It grew on me so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first half of it even, and the first listens I was not impressed with, and then slowly it built from discovering Prom King. I sort of worked backwards, and then ultimately found it very, very consistent all the way through. So yeah, that's why it worked out for me so well. And thank you for Sam for picking it, because I could easily have done so.
Okay, cool. Anyone want to talk about Kano now?
Kano doesn't appear in my other categories. If I can talk about that, yeah.
Go for it.
But I haven't got a lot to say. I've got to say it's I'm just not that moved by it, really. I'll be completely honest, and I don't know that I ever was that moved by it. It's not something that stayed with me hugely. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it's well executed, but in a list like this, it doesn't jump out at me. So I've got to say it's not one that I mean, nor is it, does not deserve to be on this list. But it just was one of the ones in the middle of the pack, really, that I didn't really hold on to very much. Yeah. So
fair play. Matt, anything to say about it now? Or?
I have a similar sentiment. It's a great album, and I have a lot of similar feelings, even though it's a very different style of hip hop. To how I felt about Saba. I didn't ever connect with it on like a level that made me want to put it on. The opening 3 tracks is some of the best opening for any of the albums on this list. It's phenomenal in parts, but I don't think it just, for the similar reasons of the starkness and things like that, it's not an album I have turned to since. And I think it doesn't
feel sad for you.
It just isn't an album that rises above this very good crowd.
I disagree.
That's going to happen a lot, isn't it? I think with the list of this quality.
Yeah, absolutely. The interesting thing is when I'm picking holes in an album like Little Simz that I adore. So I think it's interesting when you listen to so many good albums together to actually try and compare what makes them stand out to you and what doesn't. And I think it's interesting. Okay, question 2. So we're starting with Nick here. Question 2 is, which of these albums have you changed your mind about the most since it was featured on the podcast? Nick, go.
Okay, I've got to do 2 times 45 seconds because I've got to do a drop and a climb for this, because I really felt like it was very hard to judge whether the question was implying which one had gone off the boil or risen in my estimation. So I'm going to do both. Drop is Oddisee. Despite the energy, this album's not really aged that well for me. It has a kind of light and airy nature that I found not that compelling over time. It doesn't feel like its observations are profoundly personal like Saba or even like Simz. And then songs like You Grew Up have a Motown quality to them, which I really like, but don't gel with the kind of hard narrative of division that it kind of portrays. Even though I did see them live and they were great, that's just one thing. On the climb side, though, I'm going to go with Noname, an album that I wasn't that wowed by, but I just thought it was so thoughtful, intimate, particularly vocally, and clever and lush and warm and kind of comforting, even when it's not actually upbeat. So I'm going to put Noname in for my most improved category. So I've got both of them.
Interesting.
90 seconds for 2.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's allowed technically.
I'll go home now.
We'll live with it. Okay, so Matt, are you going to time me for this one?
Yeah, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah. Okay, so there was only one option for this question for me, and it was definitely Brutalism by Idols. I've been on a real journey with this album and this band, to be honest. When we featured this album on a very early episode of the podcast, I remember being positive about it, thinking it was funny and fun, but not being totally and utterly in love with it. And then we covered their second album, and they briefly became one of my favourite bands on the planet. I think the messages of positivity and acceptance and the gentle protest on that album made me revisit Brutalism. and appreciate it a lot more, even start to sort of fall in love with it, even though I never liked it as much as Joy is an Act of Resistance. But Idols have taken a rather precipitous fall in my personal favour since they released Ultra Mono last year. I thought that album was so bad, and some of the lyrics within it were so forced and fake and even offensive at times that I began to look back at some of their older stuff and look back at Brutalism and wonder if I still felt the same about them. And quite honestly, I really, really don't. I think there are some really good moments on this album. I always love 1049 Goffo. I think that's a fantastic song. Mm-hmm. But nowadays, when I hear Joe Talbot's words, I just can't get past the fact that I find him really fake and I don't really believe him. I think what I loved about this band was how authentic they seemed. But the more time I spent with them and the more I listened to him in interviews and listened to him talk, the less I believed him and it. And I think for me, when you take away that authentic belief in Idols and away from the album Brutalism, you're left with a decent album, but not a great one. So it's massively gone down in my estimation, and it was one that I kind of didn't listen to a lot this time. Perfect. Nailed it.
Nailed it. You're amazing, Fran.
Okay.
Well done.
Well done.
Feel good about yourself.
Yeah, proud of myself. Proud of myself. Matt, which of these albums have you changed your mind about the most since it featured on the podcast? Go.
Kiasmos.
Okay.
And the reason is, when we covered this, we did it in our Album of the Decade podcast. And I rated this as number 4 on my list, ahead of Beyonce. And I think that might be a mistake. It's obviously, it's a beautiful album. Like the soundscapes it creates are just kind of a joy to just get lost in. It is something that's very warm and comforting, and I have a lot of the same feelings about the album that I did when we did the Album of the Decade podcast. I do think it's fantastic. That said, it's not an iconic album. It's not, if you compare it to the rest of the list, it's not something that I'm just like, have you listened to this? This is amazing, and like sharing it. And in fact, as a clue to what an answer might be later on, I had completely forgotten this album existed until it came back on this list. So I think my initial judgment was a bit of an overestimation. That said, it's still a very good album, and I'm hoping that this time it might actually stick with me.
Can you talk for 3 more seconds, please, so I can hear my alarm? Or shall I just do that and then, you know?
You seem to be doing a great job.
Oh, well done. Did it? Now I don't have to stop it. Okay, right. So, because Nick cheated, there was 4 albums there.
There were.
Yeah.
I'm going to go in order so I don't lose my
about
mind. And I'm going to start off with Oddisee. Might talk for a little while here. Nick's very wrong. This album is pure dynamite. We covered this album on the first episode of the podcast, and I have never stopped listening to it since. Not only is it one of my favourite albums we've covered on the podcast, it's one of my favourite albums of the last decade. I know that when we started this podcast, I was in a bit of a funk with hip-hop, really. After years of it being my sort of favourite genre, I started to struggle to find a lot of stuff that did it for me. I was under the mistaken belief at the time that it was all just about guns and women and, you know, 50 Cent style stuff. So hearing this album really pulled me back in. I think it was great to hear some sort of politically conscious rap. It was also focused on a lot of issues that I care about. He really focuses in on race relations, on protest, on mental health. And his flow and lyricism is just amazing. I mean, the final verse of Things is ridiculous. The part that starts with the line, "We just want to matter more, trying to be a matador in the pit of the bull, trying to gather our status to the masses, looking at the glasses like that's pitiful." It's just amazing. There's about 4 different rhyme schemes going on in the space of about 40 words there. It's absolutely incredible. It's crazy. And he does it throughout. Hold It Back and You Grew Up are so impressive. 2 of my favourite hip-hop songs. Want to Be, which, you know, when we first did this on the podcast, episode 1, we talked about this song as the highlight, but we talked about it being a less political song than the rest. But actually, going back, I think Want to Be is probably the most political song of all time, of all of them. It's got the strongest statement. It's basically saying, I want all this fucked up shit to stop so I can have some joy in my life. And I think for me, that is what Oddisee is about. It's about striving for joy in a world full of shit. And that's why I love this album so much. It's the album that got me back into hip-hop, and only a couple of hip-hop albums have come close to it for me since then. And most of them are on this playlist, to be fair. But The Iceberg's just fantastic.
I think you make a really interesting observation about the joy, the attempt to reach the joy, because when you and I went to see him, I loved that gig. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And that was like a Motown band back in a hip-hop artist. It was just incredible. They were like swinging the guitars and in synchronization and stuff. It was just so much fun and so upbeat and effective and clever and all those things. So I remember that gig very fondly.
That's fantastic.
But
that sounds great.
But the album itself is still not for me stayed where it was. My first assessment.
Well, Matt, do you want to talk about the Oddisee at the minute? Or?
Yeah, I do. This is the first time I've got to talk about it because you featured it so early, and it's a great album. This is one of the ones that stood out to me from when I was a mere listener to this podcast. I think like the beats, the fact that it sounds live, it sounds real. Like the drums mainly. It adds a whole kind of soulful hip hop element along with his style, and it does just imbue that joy that you're talking about. And so, unsurprisingly, it connects with me a little bit more than some of the more downbeat stuff that we've covered.
The Nick Lights is what you're going to say.
Yeah.
Fair enough, I'll take it.
And I feel like he is as good a storyteller as some of the other people that we've been talking about. I think you talked about You Grew Up. I think it's fantastic. It's very, very much a highlight. And like the parts he focuses on are also kind of different to a lot of other people, I think, because he focuses on humanizing the bad guy in very, very small ways by like I can't remember what he's talking about. He's talking about some element of clothing, and it feels just with kids, and it just feels very normal and ordinary. And then, bad things happen.
That song's so clever at sort of doing that, isn't it? This sort of the idea. There's a bit about him falling out with his white friend who he was friends with when he was a kid. As that kid got older and his dad's racist views sort of took over, and it's just fascinating to give that sort of empathy to people on the other side of the aisle to you is quite impressive, I think.
Yeah, and I guess it did come out at a time where it was less divisive, and there were people making more of that effort, but there's not many people making music like in that way with their eye on the real problem, I guess, which is society.
Yes, society is the problem.
Very
okay.
profound.
While we're talking about society is the problem, I think Noname would agree with us on that. Matt, can you talk about Noname at the minute?
I can. This is one of my favorite albums on the list. It's fantastic, and I'm glad to see that you've changed your mind about it, Nick, because I remember when we talked about it that, again, this was... I think we covered this and Saba very close to each other, and I remember being in love with this album and a little bit less keen on Saba, and I felt like you guys were the other way around. And I think this is...
Saba's still better, but yeah.
I think this is this is in my top tier of this playlist. It's so diverse, it's so interesting. There's lots of like musical styles used throughout, and I think one of the big things is the way she uses her voice as well. Like she mixes in the singing, but then also the rapping, and it's very effortless the way she just moves between these styles. And so I'd love this album.
Yeah, I mean, I will say as well that my opinion did improve on this album. I think when we listened to it the first time, I thought there was some really great highlights, but found it a bit messy and unconvincing on the whole. But I think, while I originally, only saw 2 or 3 songs that I really praised and dismissed the rest, I don't really see any lows in the album now. I do think her flow's great. I think there's a nice mix of sort of jazzy, free instrumentation with a really tight flow and some great singing. Like you just said, how she uses her voice, she can actually really sing as well. But even though it's growing on me, I'll be honest, it's got some pretty tough competition on this playlist. And I do think of the 5 sort of rap albums, it's the one I enjoy the least. I think at this point, I think this album shows a lot of promise. and an artist who's got a lot of potential but hasn't quite mastered it, hasn't quite got where she will. But it's a very good album, very slick. It's got a lot to say, and I'm glad that I've sort of, had the chance to rethink my initial assessment, and I enjoy it more than I did. But it certainly won't be getting anywhere near my top 5. But yeah,
that's something. It's something.
I mean, I like it. Listen, it's great. It's very good. It's again, it's a tough competition. I'm certainly not saying anything negative about it. I just think it's not in the same league as the other hip hop albums on this for me personally. But
do you? I might surprise you that I had a look on Metacritic to see what was the most highly rated albums of our list, and this was number 1. Really? It is 18 all time.
Wow!
So it's in the top 20 albums of all time, according to Metacritic, which has, there's the Bob Dylan album in the top 15. So there's a lot of problems with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to take nothing from that. That means nothing to me. But thank you for telling me. Does anyone want to talk about brutalism?
I'm trying to think. Yeah, I suppose I can. I mean, our journey has been very different with Idols, Fran, and I think this is another example with a couple of albums where the introduction of this album, the introduction of this band, through this album was really just the start of a journey that went somewhere much more exciting in a way. So in that sense, this album itself is with the exception of the track you referenced, which I can't remember the name of now.
1049 Goffo.
Yeah, thank you. With the exception of that track, it didn't completely blow me away. I thought it was well done and energetic and all that sort of stuff, but it was more a question of getting me interested to see what they did next. And as we can at least agree what they did next was absolutely phenomenal, absolutely astonishing, even if we very much disagree about Ultra Mono.
Who agreed that it was phenomenal? Sorry?
We all agreed that the next album was phenomenal, didn't we?
Did we still agree?
Wow. You're going to go that far as to reassess Joys and Acts of Resistance that you absolutely love?
I think it's the best of the 3. But
my God, you really
don't
have
believe a word he
fallen off
says
the wagon
anymore,
with this one. Wow. Anyway, so I think the next.
Anyone
album,
want some Idols records?
I was going to say, didn't you get limited edition Ultra Mono?
Off-price Idols records.
Wow. The next album after this one would have been very high on my list. This one was somewhere more in the middle because it was just a start. It was just an opening to where they were going to go. So that's what I've got to say about that, I think.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, I think I suggested this one for the list,
You did.
mostly because I missed out on the opportunity of talking about it, and so I find this album. I think for me it's a fantastic album. I'm somewhere in between you guys, I think, because I do see some of the merits in Ultra Mono. It hasn't poisoned Idols for me.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Like it has Fran. Joy is still their best album. But this is actually the album of theirs that I listen to more than any other. I think that might be because I listened to Joy so much when it came out in 2018, I think. It was obscene, the amount I listened to that album. And so it's going to take a couple years for me to get it back into regular rotation. But this album is I think fantastic. I can see what Fran's points are, but people can change, and they are more disingenuous now, but it doesn't change the fact that at this point it felt real, and it feels real still. And so,
I think disingenuous is a super hard term to use. That seems really unreasonable to me. But either of you just use the word disingenuous on any of their stuff.
I'm not saying it is. I'm saying
Fran
that
is.
it appears that Fran is saying that.
I think Joe Talbot is 90% bullshit. I don't believe a word of it. I'm not sure that I feel the same about the rest of the band. I feel like some of the stuff I've seen from him and heard from him, and just the lyrics to some of the latest songs that are really quite offensive and go against everything they've said so far. I just feel like he saw an opening and he went for it. Fair play to him, but I don't believe there's that much truth in the music. That's my problem now.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens next.
Yeah, and I'm not writing them off. If they might bring me back in,
you are.
they
You're
might
selling
bring
your
me back
vinyl
in.
for Christ's sake. How much is that?
They might bring me back in. They just need to. Yeah, I'm interested to see what happens next. I'm interested to see what happens next.
I think so. The big thing I want to add for this album, but similar to Oddisee, I think for you, Fran, I'd started to get less interested in rock music and then this album really reinvigorated it for me. I didn't think there was much out there, and I found a bunch more on the back of this that I've since been listening to.
So I would agree with that statement. I think, even though they're necessarily idols I'm not listening to as much anymore, I probably wouldn't be listening to a lot of the stuff I am if idols hadn't burst onto the scene, because they did. I think it came at a time when it was needed, so fair play to them for that. And lots of good bands have followed in their wake.
Yeah.
But better bands. Better bands.
Mental. Absolutely mental.
So you said Kiasmos, right?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Okay, I'll talk about Kiasmos briefly. I've not got loads to say. I think this clearly deserves its place on this episode. I'm glad to see it's here. I can't think of another electronic album we've covered that comes even close to this one, and I think it would be a shame to have no electronic music on here, so I'm glad James picked it. I think it's atmospheric, I think it's exciting. I think it can be enjoyed as a chill-out album, or I think it can be more energetic than that. Feels pretty unique in that sense. I think it's very beautiful. I think it's very well put together. But just due to my personal tastes and because of the strength of the list here, it's not one that's coming near the top for me. But I'm really glad it's here, and I think spending another month with it did intensify my enjoyment of it. I do think it's a very, very good album. But yeah, I probably won't listen to it again just because it's not the kind of thing I put on often. But I do think it's very impressive. So
for Kiasmos, for me, I would say that it demonstrates something to me that I didn't know in a way was possible with this genre, which is the full sort of complexity and subtlety of electronica, which I suppose Aphex Twin I am a big fan of, but I sort of think of that as a bit more industrial in a way. But in terms of pure electronica, this album is complex and subtle in a kind of way that I had never given it credit for, and never given the genre credit for almost. And it has these synths and these builds which have like very, very nuanced work behind them, underlying them. So I was really impressed with it. I mean, like Fran, and just because of the competition, it's not super high on my list. But I mean, it deserves to be on this list. I'm glad we got to listen to it again, and I will come back to it as I have periodically over the time since we first covered it.
That's cool. I think that's a really good point. Like, I haven't listened to an electronic album that has quite as much emotion packed into it, and to carry that emotion throughout. It is a great album. It's impressive, isn't it? It's impressive how they can do that. I still can never, and I know there'll be lots of electronic music fans if they're listening to this, calling me a dickhead for saying this, but I still don't really get my head around how you get that much emotion into this kind of music, because it's not something that happens for me often. I'm a Fortet fan and I like some of Bonobo's work, but it's a very specific mood for me, that music, whereas I think with this Kiasmos album, I don't think it is such a specific mood. I think it can be different things. I think there's a lot of emotion in there, which is impressive. Yeah. So I'm glad it was on the list. I was when James picked it originally, I was like, really? Kiasmos out of all of these? But after another month with it, I can totally see that.
Great.
Cool. Okay, next question. Sure. And I'm going to go first. Matt, so you ready to time me?
So ready.
I've added a bit to the end of this question, so you guys... I need to read the question first, Matt. Come on. People need to know what I'm answering.
And you've edited the question before you've given us...
I've added a bit to the end.
Well,
I've added a bit to the end. I'm sure that you will have already answered this in your answer, but... Because previously I just said, which of these albums had you pretty much forgotten about? But if that was the question that I've got 90 seconds to answer, I would have just said the name for the album. So I've added. And what do you think of it now on the end of that? Is that okay?
No.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going with it.
Do it anyway.
The question is, which of these albums had you pretty much forgotten about? And what do you think of it now?
Go.
So I think from the 12 albums on the list, there was only really Kiasmos and Brittany Howard that I could say I'd forgotten about at all. I went with Brittany Howard as my answer to this question because that was the one I kind of most wished I'd remembered after listening to it. I went back to listen to the episode when we covered it to see what I originally said. And I wasn't entirely negative, but I did say that other than a couple of great songs, I found it a bit of a mess and a bit forgettable. Obviously, I did forget it, so that was kind of true. But I think something must have changed in my tastes over that time because I really, really liked it on this revisit. I think the last time I'd pointed out Goathead and He Loves Me as the only songs I really liked. I think Goathead is by far the best on the album by quite a long distance. But I don't know what was going on with me then, because I don't know how I wrote off songs like Georgia, Stay High, Short and Sweet. They're so much better than I gave them credit for then. I think her voice is great. I think the album's really soulful. I stand by my previous feelings about 13th Century Metal being a bit of a nightmare song and very annoying. But it's the only one on the album now that I would say is a problem. Do I think it deserves a place on the best of episode? I'm still not 100% sure that I do love it that much, but I can understand why other people do. And again, like with the Kiasmos and the Noname, I'm glad I got to sort of revisit and rethink it a little bit because, yeah, I like it a lot more than I did when we first covered it. Okay.
Cool.
Easily done in time.
Yeah.
So, to Matt next. Are you ready?
Yeah. My answer's going to be real quick and easy. Well, it's Kiasmos. So, like I said,
Kiasmos.
I completely forgotten about it. I forgot that it existed. It is, as I said, a very good album that I enjoyed a lot. But I'm really hoping that I'll this year actually remember it and listen to it several times, as opposed to not at all.
Okay. Well, that was very quick.
But yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Less than 30 seconds. He's just talked about it, hasn't he?
Yeah, that's fair.
Else to
That's
add.
fair. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
It's allowed.
Okay,
I did
then,
two,
Nick.
so you could do half of one, I suppose.
Yeah.
So, Nick, which of these albums had you pretty much forgotten, and what do you think of it now?
Okay, I'm going to go with Julia Jacklin. This album, coming back to it after this gap, was as beautiful as when I first heard it. But I realised, coming back to it, that is not enough to carry it to a place where it has enough weight to matter to me. The beauty of it is beauty in the music itself is not everything, and I wasn't particularly moved by it. So beyond the the kind of lilting vocal and the delicate acoustics and stuff like that, it was just not an album that I could get excited about, and so I forgot about it, and I think that was appropriate. Honestly, I don't feel like I want to come back to it again after this. I feel that that's the energy to Jacklin for me. So yeah, that was a quick answer as well.
Nice.
Okay. So, anyone want to talk about Brittany Howard at this point?
Sure. I think this is one of the best albums on the list. It's fantastic.
I've said that about every album so far.
Exactly. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I've said
How long's
a
your
lot
top
of
five? Have you got
albums.
40 albums in your top five?
I've got 6 at the moment, to be honest.
Not allowed.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. But I think this is one of the top tier albums on this for me. It's fantastic. She is amazing. It is just a really nice balance of his funky songs, soul songs. The tempo mixes it up nicely, so it doesn't get boring throughout. Which it might be a sin of some of the other album that we might talk about in a sec. But I just it feels confident and authentic, and I love it. I think it's very personal, universal. I could say a lot of adjectives that are positive, but it's
nice.
One of there's 6 albums that I've consistently listened to this year, and it's one of them.
Okay, interesting. Nick, I'm sensing you don't want to talk about Brittany Howard at the minute.
No, I don't.
So I'll talk about Julia Jacklin. So Julia Jacklin's another one that we covered very, very early on the podcast, and another that's stuck with me all the way since. She's become one of my favourite artists, really. I follow her very closely. I've seen her live 4 or 5 times. I love her. I think she's just such a rich, powerful, soulful voice. I think she can mix it up. She's got different levels. There's different tones to the songs. So I think sort of the fact that she has such an interesting voice means she can do the slower songs, she can do the more energetic songs, and she shines on all of them. Each song's great on this album. I think she'd go on to write a couple of even better songs on her second album, Crushing. But in terms of its success as an album, I think Don't Let the Kids Win is better than its predecessor. I think that's largely down to the storytelling here. She doesn't rest on the fact that she's got such a great voice. She tells really good stories too, and they're very relatable. I think Same Airport, Different Man is one of the best examples of storytelling I've heard on a song. I think she works through a lifetime of like loves and heartbreaks and trips home for recovery time with family, all through these little vignettes in an airport. I think it's just so well put together. And then there's the amazing title song at the end. Really interesting look at sort of parenting from the perspective of a child or being in a family. And you know, my favourite line of that is the "Don't let the kids win, just let them fall. You don't want them growing up thinking 2-year-olds are good at playing basketball." Just, you know, as well as having this great storytelling, she's also really funny, which is quite often not a feature of folk music. So I'm always really impressed with that. And yeah, I love this album. I did imagine it wasn't going to be one of the most popular ones on the list, but I don't care because it's fucking great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's some good moments in this. I really like, for example, Small Talk. I think the big feelings I have about this album really are, it sounds like, for like this kind of folk rock stylings, it just doesn't stand out. I think it's on the same. I know Big Thief is more of an indie rock, like rock leaning, but they're adjacent. And comparing the two, like, her voice doesn't stand up to it. The music isn't as dynamic.
They aren't adjacent. I just want to point that out.
In my head, they are. There's just more lulls in what's going on. And so I think on a regular playlist, this would have been a standout. On this playlist, it's very close to the bottom. And I think it's, especially in this genre, there's so many... so many artists at the moment that are in this genre, and to make an impression is hard. And so I don't think she really did that beyond a couple songs.
Fair enough. Okay, final of the 4 questions. Which album does not deserve a place on our best of episode? Matt, I'm going to start with you. You ready?
This is going to be so easy for you two, isn't it?
Yeah.
So easy.
Go, Matt.
It's Mount Eerie. Like, I wanted it to be something else. I did try.
No, you didn't.
No, I did. Like, Nick, I feel bad because I did. I
feel bad about it. It's fine.
I want you to know I've invested in this album. I've listened to this album a lot. I've tried to understand it. But my mind hasn't really changed that much. It reminds me a lot of different melancholic indie folk that's out there, but it just feels like there's less songcraft. And I get that it's imbued with this emotion of the situation, and it is this stream of consciousness. And I can understand that, and I respect that as a way of making songs. But for me, I still stand with the viewpoint that it's music for him. And if you can get something from that, that's super great. But I guess luckily for me, I haven't experienced what he's experienced, and I don't have that need for a crutch in that way, or a need for support from someone who's gone through that, and so I just can't relate to it. And yeah.
Is that you?
That's me being nice.
So that was you being nice.
Okay.
I could tell. So the question now is: does Fran want to also give it a good kick in
Well,
before I go in?
We're going to you now, mate. We're going to you. Which album does not deserve a place on the best of episode?
We'll come back to Mount Eerie in a minute then. Yeah, that's fine.
Who knows? I might surprise you.
You might. I don't think so. Okay, so I'm going to go with which album does not deserve a place. It's the Brittany Howard album. This album feels really, to me, feels quite two-dimensional. Funnily enough, I actually like the energy of 13th Century Metal, but I found that it was generally like it was very much on the nose. It was very not subtle, really, a lot of the album. And I think Goat Head, for example, it's a powerful story of kind of racism and exclusion, but it felt like it missed a lot of delicacy and a lot of care that was taken around an album like No Name's album, which was a lot more affecting and powerful for me. So the Brittany Howard album is one that could also have been one I'd put down as forgotten about, but coming back to it, I was less impressed than I was the first time, and I don't see that it should be on this list really.
Okay.
Boo.
Right. Well, that's you two taking each other's picks out in the last question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to time me, Matt?
I think
Sure.
we know your answers already, so I don't think you get to. We should just veto it.
I would love it if it isn't.
If it isn't,
but-
that'd be unbelievable. But there's no chance.
Okay, go.
Well then.
I mean, what I want to say first is I'm fascinated because I listened back to the episode where we covered this, and Matt was really, really nasty about it, and I tried to be nice and understanding. We switched here. The easiest question to answer by far, before I even started listening to the list, I knew what it was going to be. But having said that, I did try to listen to Mount Eerie's Now Only with an open mind. As much as I disliked it when we first listened to it, I wanted to give it a second chance, as I've seen other albums that my taste has changed over the years. But if anything, those changing tastes have only got me further away from getting into this album in any way. I actually find it pretty problematic. It's a troubling piece of work. I worry seriously that it will be something that him and his child will really regret later in life. It almost makes me angry because I think it's quite just wrong. It's maudlin beyond belief. And look, while it's not up to me to tell people what they should write songs about, I know that I don't want to listen to songs like this ever again. It can really ruin a good mood with a single listen. But in the end, my biggest problem with it isn't that it isn't actually musically successful, even if you can ignore the topic. It's very repetitive. It has the same sound again and again. Lyrics repeat over and over. And I don't even know if these songs qualify as songs if we're realistic about it. So it thinks it's saying lots of interesting and clever things about death, but I don't think that it is. I think it's saying lots of really obvious and really painful things, and it's saying them again and again and again and again. Realistically, it might be my least favourite album from all 40 episodes of the podcast. It's definitely in the bottom 10.
Well, I'm very glad that I got to give you a whole month of listening to it then. That's my gift to you. Well done.
Inflict that punishment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so
And
there
it
you go,
was
that's Mount Eerie.
it was transparent, frankly. When I said I was going to put it on, everyone was just going to kick it to death.
I think the interesting thing, I'll just tell you this now without going into too much. So far, we've had, I think, 7 or 8 writers have given us top 5s, and the only album that has yet to appear in a top 5 is Now Only by Mount Eerie. So,
Oh, that's cool.
yeah.
Okay. So we're going to talk about any of those?
Do you want to defend it, Nick?
I do.
We've talked about Brittany Howard, haven't we?
Yeah,
So
I do want to
suppose
defend it,
let's let you defend Mount Eerie.
So this
Everybody
is
can
another
make themselves
one.
a cup of tea while he talks about this.
This is another one that, like the Idols, really this album. The reason it wasn't my top one in this when we talked about that first question was that it's really just the start of a journey with this artist.
What a depressing journey.
Which I've followed since and has just profoundly affected my life in a way that's just stayed with me just incredibly. But that said, this specific album is a lot weaker than Lost Wisdom Part 2 that he did with Julie Doiron, I think you pronounce it, in 2019, which is absolutely, and if that was on this list, then it might have beaten the Saba and everything. But again, like with the Idols, this is an incredible artist, an incredible, searing, honest, open, vulnerable person, writing narratives that are to his core. But this first album that I had heard of his is not the strongest one that he has done. So that's what I will say.
Okay, so your defense of this album is that it's not that good compared to some of his other works.
It's a gateway album.
It's a gateway album, but it's a gateway album in the sense that I loved it and wanted to move on to more stuff of his, and then found even better stuff afterwards. So yeah.
Okay.
Is it
Cool.
okay? Is it better in the sense that you reckon we'd like it?
I think it's more the new one, Lost Wisdom. It's more profound, more subtle, more intricate, more philosophically complex. So it's in all respects it's better than this album. Which
Do the songs sound like songs?
They actually do. It's weird, isn't it? Really strange. You should watch their the Tiny Desk concert if you want a little bit of a taster of it, because that's great. They did a Tiny Desk of it.
I've got other things to do.
Yeah, we'll
No,
see.
I will. I'll give it a go. I'll give it a go.
It's really good.
I'll give it a go.
It's really good.
Okay, that is the 4 questions, and amazingly, we've covered all but 2 of the albums.
Wow.
Which surprised me. I thought we'd have quite a few to talk about at the end, but we've only got 2 left. They are Big Thief's Capacity and Sharon Van Etten's Remind Me Tomorrow. Should I start on Big Thief? Seems I picked it.
Yep.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I've already said at the start that I'm really surprised this didn't come top for me. I will say, though, that because of this album, Big Thief are the best band I've discovered because of this podcast. Matt, you introduced this as your very first Why I Love. I am very grateful to you, mate. There hasn't been another Why I Love that has been as convincing for me in the 40 episodes of the podcast. I was immediately on board, and they've become one of my favourite acts on the planet. Me and Nick went to see them on the back of you putting this on the podcast, and didn't speak to each other through the whole gig because we were still not talking about whether we liked Big Thief or not. So that was
before the episode came out. We weren't allowed to talk about it, were we? Yeah. So went our separate ways. Amazing. Yeah, straight away after the gig.
I think maybe the reason, and we've touched on this with a couple of albums, maybe the reason this didn't top my list here is because it isn't my favourite album of Big Thief's. But I
there
do
you go.
think
There's the Mount Eerie logic. That's exactly what I was saying about Mount Eerie. So yeah.
Which album's your favourite?
My favourite is the last one, which the name is it Two Hands? Yeah, Two Hands.
Yeah,
I love it. But I love all four of them. But I think as an introduction to the band for a new listener, this album is the one to go for. I think it has that oddness and otherworldly sound that makes them so fascinating and unique. It has the amazing musicianship, and it has, that sometimes seems really frenzied, but also very tightly controlled. And it has Adrian Lenker's gorgeous voice and lyrics, but it also has songs on it that, on sound alone, come across as sort of really successful pop songs. So Shark Smile and Mythological Beauty being the main example. But then I think Mythological Beauty sums up what's so fascinating about this album. It sounds like a summary indie pop song that could be a smash hit, but there's just a real darkness and honesty in the words if you really listen to it. Real sadness if you listen to the words. In its lyrics, in its lead singer, it's off kilter but very inviting instrumentation. I think Capacity has pretty much everything I look for in a great album, and I'm so glad that you did introduce it, Matt, because I don't know how I'd missed them. The fascinating and annoying thing to me is that I saw them at Green Man 2 years ago on the main stage, and I was at Green Man 2 years before that, and every time I go to a festival I sort of play through everything on the lineup really, and if something grabs me on first listen, then I'll keep listening to it and decide whether or not I'm going to go and see them. And it turns out that I was at Green Man when Big Thief played on the smallest stage in the middle of the day. I've heard it's probably their best gig they ever played, and for some reason I just heard this album the first time and dismissed it, and I regret that to this day.
That's outrageous.
I love this
album. It was this album that you listened to, or
I assume it was this song. To be honest, I don't know, because they release albums so regularly. I'm not sure, because I didn't notice it. I don't remember what album it was, because I obviously just dismissed it. So it could have been the previous album.
I think it would have been the first one, which is also a sensational album.
Yeah, it's fantastic. They're all great. I love them. But yeah, okay, Big Thief. Who's next?
I'll go. I think the kind of wailing of her vocal through all the albums that this band have produced is just impossible to resist. I think it and the vocals and the lyrics back this up very, very convincingly. This is where the Julia Jacklin comparison is worthwhile, I think. I mean, this is profoundly clever songwriting all the way through, and it was beautiful to see it live. I thought she played guitar with a lot of dynamism and excitement throughout that gig, which really brought me into the album even more at the time, and I've stayed with that. I actually think this is the best album of the ones, though. Actually, in fact, I think it's possibly the best folk rock album I've ever heard.
Wow!
And I absolutely love it. Yeah. So, but I haven't listened to the others. I mean, I've listened to them all a fair bit, but this is the one I come back to most often. I think from the very first track, from Pretty Things onwards, it just knocks it out of the park. So yeah, absolutely love it.
Fantastic.
Cool.
Matt.
Well, yeah, this was, as Fran alluded to, it was why I love for me, and it hasn't changed. This is my favourite album of theirs. I was initially a little down on UFOF, but I do love all of their albums.
Same. UFO, it's grown on me so much, that album. But
yeah, it's still maybe their weakest, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree.
But I think I was just had very high expectations and succumbed to that. But yeah, I think you guys have covered it all. Like, the songcraft is second to none, essentially. Her voice is maybe my favourite voice in music, maybe.
Wow.
I
None
don't
of
think
us
anyone...
picked this as the number one album, right? Listen to how we're talking about this album, but none of us picked it as the number one.
Yeah, I don't think anyone does like this blend of sincerity and like intimacy and like the rawness that she puts in. Quite.
Have you both listened to Songs and Instrumentals, the solo album?
I've only
once,
given it a couple listens.
So
like the less dynamism that's in her solo stuff, I still love it. I really like it. I just doesn't hit me in the same way.
I think Song and Instrumentals is the first one of the solo albums that I think is as good as a Big Thief album. It's quieter though, and it takes a little bit more time, and it's very, very, very bleak.
I think Matt's right though that it misses that dynamism because the band really are a band. It's not Big Thief really are. I mean I don't know the names of the members. But the drummer is really sort of stylishly jazz infused all the way through the live set, and that I've seen in performances I've seen of his, and then what's his name, the guitarist that we went to see, Matt? Mark Meek, yeah. He's also just a very lyrical guitarist, if that's possible. He kind of jumps around and flows through parts in a really beautiful way. So they all together add up to this band, and obviously the bass is great as well. So they add up together to a band that's really amazing, and therefore the solo stuff doesn't quite carry that. But I did enjoy it when I heard it that time. Yeah,
I mean I can't argue with any of that, but I think definitely spend some more time with that album because it's one that gets in the longer you spend with it. But yeah, Big Thief, phenomenal. Okay, one more, which is Sharon Van Etten's "Remind Me Tomorrow." Nick, you picked this one, so do you want to kick us off?
Although I think I'm going to say that on reflection, I think I should have picked a different one.
Wow.
I do really like this album, and I do think it's I love the 80s vibe of some of it, like Comeback Kid. I think it's very very intimate from that opening track. It's very close to you, which is, as I said a number of times today, is something that really I find affecting, and therefore that's why Saba has done so well in this list for me. But actually, I've not listened to it quite as much as the Mitski album, which I don't think any of you liked, but Be the Cowboy, which stayed with me much more.
That's good.
Yeah, so I actually, as I thought about it, I picked it, and then I was like, oh shit, no, what about the Mitski album? But it was too late by then. I do think Sharon Van Etten is worth listening to, and I'll keep going back and following what she does. She also did an interesting thing with, I'm forgetting what the band is now. I'm going to forget.
I know who you mean.
That's helpful.
Local natives.
Local natives. Thank you so much for saving me. She did a great song with Local Natives, and she's doing really good stuff, and I'm impressed by that. But I sort of wish I could have talked about the Mitski album instead today. But there we are. So that's all I can say.
Well, I told you about the Mount Eerie not being anyone's list, but apart from one on all the lists that we've had so far, Sharon has made an appearance. So I'm not going to say that she's been at the top of everyone's, but she's been in most people's top fives, which I think is interesting.
Wow.
Matt, do you want to talk about Sharon?
Yeah, I think this is a fantastic album. This is in my top 6. I do think it's an almost perfect modern rock album. I don't see many flaws in it. I do think that like artists like her and Mitski are really leading the front with this kind of like straight down the road pop rock album aesthetic. But I think her transformation from a kind of a pretty regular folk artist into this album is one of the biggest step ups I've seen from album to album of anyone that I follow, and it's amazing. And this album I listened to it so much. It's fantastic.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's another of the albums on the list that stayed with me ever since we covered it, and one that's I've grown to appreciate more and more as time's gone on. I think it's a masterclass in songwriting and album construction. I think it manages to have like real variation in its sound while also feeling totally cohesive. I think when we covered it, I picked out 17 as my highlight, and I think it probably still is. But I think something stuck out to me really when I was listening back is that sometimes when we're listening to so much music for the podcast, I can get stuck on a standout song or two and not appreciate the complexities across the album. Because I think on Remind Me Tomorrow, actually some of the most important parts are the quieter parts. I think there's the gentle intro to I Told You Everything, the silences in Memorial Day, or just the long drawn-out notes in Jupiter 4. I think it's a gorgeous, complex album. And I think that can be sort of missed a little bit on the first few listens because of the pop songs like 17 and Come Back Kid. I think people can just think it's a pop rock album, but there's so much more to it than that. I think it's an album that begs for repeated listens, and even though we listened to it back in March 2019, I've been listening to it ever since, and I still feel like I'm discovering new nuances in it all the time. I think it definitely deserves to be considered among the best albums we've featured on this podcast, so I'm glad you picked this instead of Mitski, because that... I may have had a contender along Mount Eerie for the one that doesn't deserve a place on the list if you'd picked Mitski, though.
Wow.
So maybe they would have battled it out a little bit.
That's a big statement. Yeah.
Sharon
No, I
Van
mean
Etten
I really like this, and this was in my top half as well. But it's still I stand by the other comment I made. Honourable mention to Mitski, basically.
Yeah.
If we're doing honourable mentions, I could do a few, but I won't.
If we're going to talk briefly, the album you're talking about with Mitski is not as good as her previous ones.
Okay.
I'm just going to throw that out there.
All right, fair enough. We're going off track now, though, aren't we? So.
I forgot we'd listened to Mitski. Can we do question 3 again? I'd forgotten that even existed, and I wish I had. I feel like I should give it another go, though.
Yeah. So,
okay.
Big moment.
So we're now going to figure out what the top 5...
Do you want our full 10? Is it 10, 12?
No, I just want 5 from you, man. I just want 5.
And
5.
what is...
Yes, you got 5. He's got 6, you just told us.
Yeah, so I can nail this down.
That's why he's trying to avoid it by saying 12.
What is the question we're going for? The best album? My favourite?
Your top 5 favourite albums on this list, basically, I think would be,
Okay.
I think that would be what the best way of looking at it. To save it from being very complicated, because it sounds like you want to do some sort of science equation. And I just want to know which fucking 5 albums you like, Matt.
I just need to nail down this like you keep changing the questions, and so I need to make sure I get it right. Although my opinion will change by tomorrow.
Yeah, or even by the time you finish reading the list.
Yeah, well, I battled for ages with 5th and 6th position.
Yeah, I did as well.
I'll tell you mine because I know mine. So in position 5 is Sharon Van Etten with Remind Me Tomorrow. In position 4 is Julia Jacklin, Don't Let the Kids Win. In position 3 is Oddisee's The Iceberg. In position 2 it's Big Thief's Capacity. And in position 1 is Kano's Hoodies All Summer.
So Little Simz didn't even make it in your top 5?
No. Little Simz was the one that was battling with Sharon Van Etten.
Okay, all right.
When I was talking about Little Simz, what I decided was there wasn't a bad song on Sharon Van Etten. And I'm not saying that Venom or Therapy are bad songs necessarily. Therapy is.
That would be very wrong.
Venom.
They are dips in the quality of the album. You're just all getting when you look at Venom, her flow is amazing on that song, but the beat's not very good compared to the rest of the album. It just isn't. It's just very wishy-washy. So you're just very impressed by her flow.
Yeah, there's no energy in that song at all. I see what you're saying.
But it's
very,
not. It's not a great song. And Therapy's not great either. So that's what Sharon Van Etten pushed that out, because there's not a bad moment on that album. But it was a tough choice for me. I'm not going to lie. And also, Saba could have got there. There's lots of albums that could have got there. It was a great list.
Okay.
Who are we going to?
Matt, go for it.
So in 6th place.
No. We've got things in our ears now.
No, well.
No.
I'm going to drop Sharon, and 5th place is Brittany Howard, mostly because Nick hated it.
Okay.
Fair enough.
5th place
And then
is Brittany
fourth is Idols.
Okay.
3rd is My Phone Went to Sleep, Noname.
Your phone went to sleep, Noname.
Noname.
I thought you had your list on your phone for a second there and you lost it.
2nd is Big Thief.
Yeah.
And 1st is Little Simz.
First is Little Simz. Okay. Little Simz. I'm just writing these down, sorry, so I can add up at the end, because I've got a lot of complicated maths to do.
Yeah.
Good luck to you.
Okay, Nick.
Okay, so my 8th, we'll start with 5th. My 5th is Noname.
Noname.
Nice.
My 4th is Mount Eerie.
Mount Eerie made the top 5. They all made the top 5. Woo!
My third is Big Thief. And my second is Little Simz. And my first, as I explained, is Saba.
So I have a little bit of maths to do.
Good list, everyone.
So now we've got the interesting question of how on earth are we going to talk for like 10 minutes while Fran furiously tries to work out the maths of this?
I feel like
I was going to say, I don't know why we get Fran to do this.
Yeah, there is somebody in the team here who's a little better at maths than
When
Fran.
I'm literally a scientist who handles data.
You could introduce the next episode.
Oh, I thought you were talking
Well,
about
you
me.
can do it in the next time if you want. By
I thought you
all
were talking
means.
about me, Matt, as an opportunity to do the maths.
Do you want to talk about the playlist as a whole? I guess it is. I don't know. I thought it was really good to revisit a lot of these, though. It was really good because I like a lot of these albums, and my opinion didn't actually change that much on any of them. I don't think.
I think I had a first three, a sort of top three, a second, sets of them. Like top three that was kind of jostling, and then the next set, and then the bottom set that were kind of switching out several times. But yeah, in general, the only album that I really did not want to listen to when it came on was Brittany Howard. Everything else I got through and enjoyed.
I find that interesting, but it's okay. We both feel the same about Mount Eerie, and I'm not gonna be mean about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm exactly the same. I had clusters, but I very quickly knew my top 6 because I had been listening to all of those albums continuously. Right. Everything else had been dropped off my radar a little bit.
Right. Yeah.
And
for me, the Mount Eerie, as I said, although it's possibly my favourite artist of these artists, isn't my favourite album of this artist. So that's why he ended up dropping down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't listening to anything you guys said then.
That's fine. We were slating you.
Sounds fascinating.
We were slating you the whole time.
But if we're talking about I think this is an exceptional playlist, and I think also it just shows, the joy of doing this podcast in a lot of ways. Is how many of these albums I wouldn't maybe have heard if it wasn't for this. And for me, there was, I think, 7, maybe 8 actually exceptional albums, and then every other one apart from Mount Eerie was at least very good, and I'm glad I listened to them. So other than Mount Eerie, everything on this list is something I'm really glad I discovered. So I just thought, it was great, and it was really nice to have a month of listening to these kind of albums.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I have a top 5.
So how are you going to do this? How are you going to announce this? We need fanfare.
Reverse order.
Let me just figure out if it's the top 5 or 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it's a 5. It's a 5. There are two that are joint, so I wasn't sure. Okay,
so not joint first, I hope.
You're not going to start with last?
Yes, I am. Oh, what? You want all of them? You want all of them?
Yeah.
All 12?
Yeah.
How are you going to get that? We haven't told him what our rankings are, apart from the top 5.
Well, the top 5s that came in, I can do it.
Not everyone picked the same.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so if the top 5 that came in,
all right, then,
and the votes that we've got, so I gave 5 points to whatever came first on a scale down to 1 to whatever came 5th. So with 2 points, all coming from Nick, and in last place is Mount Eerie.
This is the only reason I wanted you to read them all out.
to fuck me over, yeah.
4 points. This is fascinating because you two argued about both these albums. With 4 points, second to last, 11th place, Brittany Howard.
It makes sense.
10th, Julia Jacklin. 9th, joint 9th actually. Joint 8th. 7 points is Oddisee and Noname. Then it's Idols.
Right.
Then it's Kiasmos.
What are we up to now?
So that's Kiasmos are in number 6.
Right, so now we're in the top 5 now.
The interesting thing was Kiasmos were winning this for quite a while. They got 2 people's number 1 spots.
Okay.
Cool.
So in joint 4th, 5th, it's Saba's Care For Me and Sharon Van Etten's Remind Me Tomorrow.
Top 3 now, top 3.
Third best album is Kano's Hoodies All Summer, which was winning for a while as well. Big Thief, after your 2's votes, has shot up from nowhere to claim second place with 17 points.
Good.
Wow.
And 9 points ahead in the end after you 2 is Little Simz, Grey's Area.
Oh, yes.
With 26 points.
Everything's in the shadow of Little Simz.
Yes.
Fantastic.
That's the way things should be.
I'm happy with that, even though Saba was better. I'm happy with that.
That top 5's great, isn't it? As much as I didn't check. Little Simz didn't make my top 5 personally, but that's a great top 5. So
Yeah.
Saba, Sharon Van Etten, Big Thief, Kano, and Little Simz in the top 5s. I'm happy with that.
The only thing I'm aggrieved about is Brittany Howard being below Julia Jacklin, but I can stomach that if needs be.
Because it's Julia Jacklin's a better.
Because you don't have
album.
an option, basically.
Well, we maybe need to look at some replacements for some of these editors.
Wow. That is a very harsh
I mean, it was
remark.
also the right. It was the writers as well.
Yeah.
Okay. That's fair then.
And actually,
Clean slate then.
you know,
Fire everyone.
I was expecting a top 5 from somebody who couldn't make it in the end, and I actually feel that they would have really liked Julia Jacklin, so it may have been higher, but never mind.
Never mind.
Okay, there
That
you
was
go.
great.
Little Simz.
Little Simz.
Little Simz.
The fun,
Cool.
Shock
the fun
horror.
after 40 episodes. That's pretty
Yeah,
immense.
do you know what I was really enjoying when I was putting this together when they came in, and the first few lists that came in, it didn't look because I knew Little Simz was going to win, so I kind of didn't want it to just because I don't like things being predictable. So I was enjoying for a while that it looked like someone else, but then as soon as Matt started talking about Little Simz as his number 1 at the start of this episode, I was like, okay, Little Simz is one.
Yeah.
But it's a great album, fantastic.
It is.
And if anyone who's listening hasn't yet been hammered on the head by who's talking about Little Simz enough to listen to it, then fucking listen to Little Simz because it's great. But Kano's better, and so is Big Thief. Right, okay.
Cool.
Episode 40 done. So should we
Wow.
talk about next time?
Well,
Yeah.
I would, except that I've completely forgotten what my picks were. So someone's going to have to remind me.
I can find them. I can
It's
find
Nick
them.
Cave.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Nick Cave and Warren Ellis with Carnage is one of Nick's.
Yeah, and then the other one's The Body. I've seen all I need to see.
Seen all I need to
Which
see.
is a great title. Whether it's a good album, I have no idea, but it's a great title.
Yeah, I do like that.
I have picked The Antlers with Green to Gold and the very, very hyped album right now, Dry Cleaning with New Long Leg.
Cool. And we're going to do the classic album, Dr. Octagon, with Dr. Octagon Ecologist. Ecologist.
Sorry, can you say that again, please?
I didn't quite catch that, yeah.
Dr. Octagon Ecologist.
Gynecologist, right?
That's amazing.
Not
Where the hell
quite.
did you dig that up from?
Dr. Octagon Gynecologist.
Yeah. And I'm also, for my Why I Love, I'm going to present a playlist of Bombay Bicycle Club.
So Matt just wants some shit names to end the podcast on, really.
Yeah, it's how I filter down.
Okay.
Right. Well, that
Okay.
was great. Fantastic.
Yeah.
So nice
Yeah,
to have a
good
list that was
stuff.
mostly great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really
Yeah.
uplifting.
Okay, so yeah, just to say, go and check us out at pickybees.com. Follow us on Twitter at pickybastards, capital P, capital B.
Do we have a
do
Facebook
not
anymore?
follow us on Facebook because Mark Zuckerberg kicked us off Facebook for having the word bastards in our title. Which is quite
Who
outrageous
needs
because the
Facebook?
fucking
Nobody's
bluegrass
on,
band...
Nobody's on Facebook, are they? I mean, come on.
The
let's be
bluegrass band,
honest.
the Picky Bastards, are still there. They're still fucking plucking away,
Report
playing the
'em.
banjos.
Report them.
So I'm offended by this.
That sounds very vindictive. No one else.
And also, another thing we should point out is that I hope they listen, some bastards, literal
Oh,
bastards,
yeah. This is outrageous.
have called their podcast The Picky Bastards.
Yeah.
They are, I don't know, critiquing telly, like anyone's interested
And
in fucking
films.
talking about Bridgerton, whoever you are.
My wife is.
But the most interesting thing about it is that they've just stolen the font and our writing from somewhere and put it in their logo. It's the direct font and everything and they've just put it in theirs.
Wow.
So if you're listening, we're coming for you. We're coming for you. I said it.
Are you, Fran?
Oh, my God.
Yeah, we're coming for you. We can't find you, and I don't know how to find you, and I don't know where you're from.
And if you did find him, you don't know what you'd do anyway.
Yeah,
But
they'd probably just run away. But you are genuine. You are genuine bastards.
Whereas we're just pretending, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much for that. It was really upbeat podcast and really nice, and then you just went to this massive vitriolic shouting match.
Shall we all go and listen to Grey Area now?
Yeah, let's do that.
That makes it better.
All right,
next
great.
time, people.
See you next time. Bye. Bye.